Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we are preparing for finals. So this will be a bit of a shorter episode. Today we have an interview with Erin Intrada Kelly for her new book, At Last She Stood. Texas advances a bill that would criminalize librarians for providing sexually explicit material to minors. And a Colorado bill limiting book bans is signed into law. Let's begin first with an interview with Erin Intrada Kelly. Erin Intrada Kelly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you? I'm so happy to be here.
I'm very busy, but we make do. Would you care to start off by introducing yourself and just talking a little bit about the book we'll be discussing today?
Absolutely. So I'm Erin Intrada Kelly. I'm best known for writing middle grade fiction. I received the 2018 Newbery Medal for Hello Universe and the 2025 Newbery Medal for The First State of Being. But this is my first nonfiction. It's called At Last She Stood, How Joey Guerrero Spied, Survived, and Fought for Freedom. And it is the story of Josefina Guerrero, who everyone knew as Joey, who was a spy in the Philippines during World War II. Now, shortly after, a lot of people know that Imperial Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, but what a lot of people don't know is right after that, they bombed and invaded the Philippines. And around that time, Joey, who was in her late teens, about 19 years old at the time, found out she had Hansen's disease, better known as leprosy. And she decided, you know what, these might be my last years on this earth. I want to do something meaningful. So she joined the underground and worked as a spy. So she would carry messages in her hair, in her shoes, taped to her body. She played a very pivotal role in the Allied forces being able to free hundreds of prisoners of war, because she delivered a map taped to her body that they needed to be able to infiltrate the grounds. So she did all that. And then after the war, she was sent to a leprosarium, and because she had received the Medal of Freedom and all she had done for the Allies, a group in the U.S. fought and rallied to get her care here in America. So she went from the Philippines to Carville, Louisiana. At the time, Carville was home to one of the most renowned leprosariums in the world, and it's very near where I grew up. So I felt a kinship to Joey for a lot of reasons. She's Filipino, and she lived in Louisiana for a number of years. And afterwards, when she finally was tested negative for Hansen's disease and she was able to leave, she stayed in the U.S. They tried to deport her, but she had a lot of people fighting for her to be able to stay, especially after all she did. I mean, I'm talking, she pulled wounded men to safety. She prayed with them as they died. She, not to mention the role she played in liberating almost 400 American prisoners of war. So she was able to stay. She, got a job in a call center. She faced a lot of discrimination because she was an immigrant with a thick accent. And she also grew tired of speaking about the war. She was discriminated against because she had Hansen's disease. And ultimately, she decided, I'm going to cut off all my hair. I'm going to change my name, and I'm going to move from California to Washington and just assume a new identity. And that's what she did. So when she died, no one knew that she had done all these incredible things. So that is her story in a very brief summation, and I wanted to bring it to light because there's so many heroic people who did incredible things who have not been able to, share the spotlight with the dominant narrative of all the heroes that we know off the top of our heads. So she is an unsung hero, to use a cliche, but my hope with this book is that she'll get the recognition that she deserves.
I think probably the first question, one thing that I think young audiences would probably take away from this, one of two, is what exactly is Hansen's disease? We've heard of leprosy and what it means to be a leper and how that colloquially is associated with being an outcast. But what is Hansen's disease and how can it affect somebody?
That's a great question. So Hansen's disease is caused by a tiny microbe, and it basically manifests as lesions on the skin. It can cause disfigurement, open wounds, fever, nosebleeds, headache, joint pain. It's very debilitating. And because of its historic relationship to the Bible, and across almost all religions, actually, it's historically been seen as a filthy or sinful disease. So, historically, because of the Bible, there's a lot of implications that if you have leprosy, it's because you've been cursed and you're sinful. And so, for all of these reasons, the physical manifestations, the religious associations, leprosy has been one of the most feared diseases, if not the most feared disease in the world. So it really does affect every aspect of your life. But the irony is that it's very difficult to contract Hansen's disease. So, there's stories of true stories of people with the disease having to ring a bell as they walk down the street, having to wear like a black cloak to identify themselves, um, and blatant just mistreatment, being killed, being outcast, all these things because of the fear around it. Now, 95% of the population has a natural immunity to Hansen's disease. And those who don't, it's still very difficult to contract. You have to be in prolonged contact with someone who has it. It's not like something like, say, tuberculosis or the common cold or COVID, where you can catch it from, more casual contact. So um, it affects every area of your life, not just physically, but socially and no doubt emotionally, mentally, um, all aspects of your life.
And the way that it affects people socially, the way that it kind of creates a barrier between people. During this time, when Joey Guerrero is living in the Philippines and Japan is invading during World War II. That's something that even I didn't know. I'm not very well versed on history. Um, when you see two nations that are when you see two when there are two nations at war, typically there is a major divide in the classes. Would you say that the Hansen's disease and leprosy with Joey Guerrero kind of uh, exaggerates this kind of clash between the two different cultures?
I would say, I would say yes and no. I would say yes because she had this disease. Ironically, it made her an excellent spy because nobody wanted to touch her. So that made it easier for her. I say easy; it's relative, of course, but to courier messages on her person because nobody wanted to touch her. That being said, leprosy has existed in countries all over the world, including Japan and America and Europe and all this stuff. So I don't know that it necessarily accentuated a difference between the classes per se, but um, I would say that no matter what class you belonged to, if you contracted leprosy, it was you were outcast no matter where you fell in the hierarchy, and that was true in the U.S. as well because at Carville at the leprosarium, there were people from all walks of life, and um, once people left, and well, usually they were taken because by law you had to be locked away in a leprosarium if you had Hansen's disease. Once they got there, they changed their names because it was such a shameful thing to have a quote unquote leper in the family. So it's almost as if people with leprosy, I guess to your question, are a class of their own, all over the world, and that class is has been historically, discriminated against and seen as, um, less than.
Thank you. And the second major question that arises from this story is probably a little more closely tied to your previous work in writing middle grade and writing for young audiences, especially with this book, writing for younger audiences. I think that it echoes a lot of young readers' sentiment when I ask, being a spy was a real job?
Yes, being a spy was a real job. And it's so funny because she was one of my favorite things about her is not only was she a spy, but she was to look at her. I mean, she was less than 100 pounds. She was less than 5 feet tall. She was a very small woman. So, one of the things that I love about Joey's story is, when we think about things like bravery or spies or courage, we have this image that pops in our mind, and it's probably not an image of a little tiny Filipino woman. But that's exactly, what she was. She was a tiny woman who did big, dangerous things.
And you mentioned that, tiny Filipino woman, how she had such a big impact and how the course of her life in the Philippines as someone with Hansen's disease greatly affected World War II and saved a lot of lives. When she comes to America and is a recipient of the I'm blanking on it right now,
Medal of
the
Freedom.
Medal of Freedom. When she comes to America and is a recipient of the Medal of Freedom, then to face further discrimination. There seems to be an ongoing theme in the United States of honoring veterans and heroes, but not quite living up to those standards when it comes to actual people. Do you have anything to say on that? Is there anything within Joey's story that reflects that ideal?
Yes, that's an excellent point. I think what happens often is World War II is top of mind, and she did all these great things, so let's honor her. And, oh, everyone loves Joey. And then the war ends, right? And time goes by. And, because all of those things are not top of mind anymore and it's not an exciting new thing, all of a sudden it's okay, let's deport her now. She came up, we were kind enough to bring her over here for her to get care. And now her care has ended. So I think it's time to deport her to the Philippines. And um, disregarding there are a chorus of voices, and ultimately they made a huge difference, supporting her fight to stay in America because um, everything that she did, all the lives that she saved, and not just lives that she saved, but praying with men who were dying or wounded on the side of the road, putting her life on the line, working with the Allied forces. I definitely agree with you that when things are top of mind and things are in the news and things have the ability to make a splash and make people look good, all of a sudden it's celebratory. But once those things fade, um, then it's okay. It's time to deport her back to the Philippines, even though her family has been ripped apart and her home has been destroyed, and there's no reason why she can't stay here in America. So I agree with you. There's often a lot of rhetoric, but not always a lot of follow through in general in situations like this.
And speaking of in the news, to have someone who is a war hero who so greatly impacted the Allies during World War II, facing deportation. How much of the story that you put forth in At Last She Stood, how much of that story do you focus on the deportation aspect of that whole legal kerfuffle that arose from that, like the battle with the government and the battle with people speaking on her behalf to keep her in the United States?
I spend as much time as my research was able, so that this book was very difficult to research because I had limited access to information. She didn't leave behind a diary or journals or letters, so for the most part, so I had to rely on all the other documentation I could. So Certainly I dive into it with all the information I had available to me, and with the hope that um, that readers see it's complicated, right? Because our country is complex and has a complex, problematic history, and the United States colonized the Philippines for a very long time. And my hope is that readers will be able to have a three-dimensional view, for lack of a better word, of the situations like this, meaning that we're raised to believe that the United States is the best, the brightest, the number one, country in the world, and we're always the heroes. But that's not always true. So, you know, my hope is that, books like this and many others trigger these critical thinking skills to say, okay, you know what? I can be proud of my country and proud of all the things that we claim to stand for, but also I can recognize that we, like virtually every other government in the world, have made mistakes and have had some missteps. So there's definitely some of that, not just in the deportation aspect, but in the fact that America colonized the Philippines brutally in the beginning, and that we you know played a role in stripping to some degree indigenous culture in the Philippines by colonizing them. So, there's a lot to unpack, and more than one thing can be true at once.
Absolutely, and like there's a lot to unpack. It's all about challenging the preconceived worldview of expanding the scope of knowledge. And one thing that you said was that this was a very difficult. One thing that you said was that this was a very difficult topic to research, and I can attest to that. When I look up Joey Guerrero, the first thing that comes up is your book. What is
Yes.
the process of researching uh, something something so? What is the process of researching something that is so difficult to find in contemporary and mainstream history texts?
That's a great question. So it involved a lot of kind of accessing sources surrounding her. So for example, she influenced so many people's lives so that other people wrote about her. So I had to go read those people's memoirs, and then researching the war in general and things that were happening around her, and then also spending hours and hours going through the National Archives looking at spy notes. We don't have her spy notes, but we have many, 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 many other spy notes available at the National Archives, just to get a sense of the atmosphere around her. When I didn't have the answers about her life specifically, I looked for answers about her life tangentially.
And doing all this research is very different than is obviously very different than writing fiction. Can you speak a little bit about the process of writing a nonfiction book from someone who primarily writes fiction?
Sure. So, the biggest challenge was, with a novel, you have all the pieces because you created the pieces. So you can snap it together and you have the puzzles all put together and it's a beautiful picture. With nonfiction, you have to find the puzzle pieces elsewhere. And in this case, I didn't have all of them. So I had to figure out a way to make a picture that readers could see and understand and appreciate. So that was the biggest challenge because I can't just fill in the pieces with my own imagination. It kind of is what it is. So I did my best to use all the other skill sets that people use in writing novels to write nonfiction, because good storytelling is good storytelling.
And to go a little bit more on the potentially more on the business side of publishing and writing, was the idea of writing a nonfiction book specifically about this person, was that something that you came up with, or was that something that someone approached you with?
It's something that I came up with. The concept of me writing nonfiction was collective between me and my editor, because we both love nonfiction, and she knew I read a ton of nonfiction and that I wanted to write nonfiction. But the story of Joey specifically came from me because I was reading a book called Cure by Pam Fessler, and it's the story of the Carville Leprosarium, the history of it. And in that book, about 75% in, I came across a paragraph and it said Filipino spy and, all the things. It wasn't very much, but immediately, I sat up and thought, this is the story that I want to tell. So that's how it all came to be.
And to close out the interview, I do have one question I like to ask all authors, so I enjoy hearing the perspective from as many different people as possible. Erin, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
Wow. I see myself as writing to and for my younger self. I see myself, whenever I think of my readers or my ideal readers, they're similar to me. They're, lonely, introverted kids who are trying to find their way and find their voice. And my hope is that my books give them comfort and make them feel seen and make them feel perceived in a world where they may not feel that way. So that's how I try to approach all my work.
Thank you. That was an interview with Erin Intrada Kelly. Her latest book, At Last She Stood, How Joey Guerrero Spied, Survived, and Fought for Freedom, releases on May 16th. You can learn more about Erin and her book and her other work at erinintradakelly.com. Next, we'll take a look at notable new releases. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can simply like, rate, review, comment, follow, or subscribe, etc. on whatever platform you are currently listening. You can also follow the podcast on Blue Sky at BookFairPod or on Patreon at patreon.com/thebookfair. There you can find episodes posted early as well as links to sources used in the show. Following on Patreon is completely free, and there are no posts locked behind a paywall. However, the best way to support the show is to simply share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now on with the show. Next, let's look at notable new releases, beginning with Athlete is Agender. True Stories of LGBTQ+ in Sports, by Katherine, Locke, and Nicole Melleby. Illustrated by Jess Vosseteig. Previous collaborators Locke and Melleby collect first-person narratives of queer athletes, including authors Eric J. Brown, Marieke Nijkamp, and A.J. Sass, and profile impactful figures in this affirming sports assemblage. Centering activities including basketball and horseback riding, with a marked emphasis on ice and water sports, the creators present discussions of identity and togetherness, and how these ideals were fostered, alongside painful challenges surrounding puberty, particularly for non-binary and transgender athletes. Color photos of the subjects as children and adults appear among sensitively rendered portraits by Vosseteig, and callouts depict quotes from contemporary and historical athletes that highlight the importance of finding a welcoming space within sports. Key moments from history punctuate each narrative, further demonstrating how these activities empower queer individuals. Sections titled Get to Know feature individuals including Carl Nassib, the first openly gay player in the National Football League, and Elia Green, a transgender activist and rugby Olympic gold medalist. Includes information about pronouns and how to improve one's allyship. This book is recommended for ages 9 to 14. Next up, Camp Frenemies by Liz Montague. This witty, well-paced graphic novel follows the interpersonal trials and tribulations of 3 cabin mates at sleepaway camp. Curly-haired 6th grader B, whose parents hope sending her to Camp Cordata will help expand her social circle beyond her collection of stuffed animals. Redhead Virginia, who wears a permafrown, balks at B's eccentricities, and mourns the loss of potential friendship with the girls on her school's soccer team after not making the cut, and cheerful Roxy, who sports blonde braids and acts as the group's peacemaker, until she grows tired of B and Virginia's bickering. Mean-spirited pranks and capsized canoes derail the girls' attempts to foster friendship, events that Montague captures via simple line drawings and flat, saturated color palettes. B's homebound plushies appear as her conscience and take on the role of an omniscient Greek chorus in thought balloons, providing commentary on the protagonist's hardships, and inject whimsy and humor throughout. Characters are depicted as having varying skin tones, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next up, You and Me on Repeat by Mary Shine. After entering a strange rainbow portal at a big box store, estranged childhood friends Chris O'Brien and Alicia Ochoa find themselves stuck in a time loop of their graduation day. At first, Chris assumes that the only way to break the loop is to achieve the perfect first kiss with his girlfriend at their classmate's graduation party, which keeps getting busted. Upon realizing the futility of the situation, he joins dutiful valedictorian Alicia in using the loops to enjoy some well-earned fun, finally free from social and familial expectations. Looping also allows Chris to rectify the mistake that cost him and Alicia their friendship, and once reconciled, the two shyly flirt toward romance while hypothesizing how to break the loop. Shine pairs flat line work and monochromatic coloring, each loop has its own hue, with dynamic perspectives and compositions, invoking a playful tone that never undermines the novel's poignant moments. A secondary plot involving Chris's late swim coach and her psychiatrist husband provides just enough deus ex machina and emotional heft for this time-bending rom-com to land both mechanically and sentimentally. It's a cleverly executed graphic novel debut that successfully innovates the time loop meta. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. And lastly, The Wish Switch by Lynn Painter. Sixth grader Emma Rockford was raised by her beloved late grandmother to believe in the magic of a powerful fairy portal that purportedly grants wishes. While on a class field trip, Emma uses instructions left by Nana to sneak away with her BFFs Kennedy and Allie to find the portal so they can each make 4 secret wishes. At a crucial moment, they're interrupted by Emma's brother Noah and new kid Jackson. Later, Emma realizes that while her friend's wishes have come true, her own seem to have benefited Jackson instead. As big changes start occurring for Kennedy and Allie, Emma questions her own fate and struggles to deal with heartbreak and disappointment. She soon resolves to make her wishes come true, even if she must team up with Jackson to do it. In a playful middle-grade debut, author Painter employs a speculative premise to capture the joys and heartaches of adolescent physical, mental, and social shifts. Emma's steadfast narration and organically rendered relationships deftly ferry messages of perspective, faith, and acceptance in this sweet take on growing up. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Rounding out the episode with a couple of headlines, first, a troublesome new bill from Texas seeks to limit access to books to children. HB 3225 has been floating in the committee since the beginning of the 2025 legislative session in Texas. And now, after contentious debate, the bill has been passed in the House of Representatives with an 82 to 53 vote. The author of the bill, Daniel Alders, said on Friday, quote, "This is a simple bill intended to protect our Texas kids. This bill addresses a real issue that we have seen in our public libraries across the state, and it does so in a way that is reasonable as well as effective. It's not a complicated bill. It shouldn't be controversial." End quote. However, despite the author's claim that it shouldn't be controversial, opposition spoke for nearly 2 hours of deliberation on the bill. Among many criticisms of the text of HB 3225 includes an overly broad definition of sexually explicit material. Representative Ann Johnson addressed alders on various aspects of the bill, calling out the way it defines a minor as anyone under 17, meaning that teenagers seeking health information related to puberty will not be able to access resources that are relevant to them. Johnson also asked alders when it was appropriate to have a discussion about masturbation, which alders said he was not expected to be asked about on the House floor. Johnson currently said that alders shouldn't have introduced the bill if he wasn't prepared to defend it. Aside from the public debate on the absurdity of the bill, the text also includes a $10,000 fine for libraries that do not comply with the proposed law of removing all sexually explicit material from the children's section. The bill would, however, allow for people under 17 to check out materials with parental permission. This law could seek criminal charges against librarians that do not comply, and as argued before on the podcast, smaller libraries simply don't have the resources for this kind of policy. Rural libraries may have a single room and section, meaning that there would be no children's section to remove materials from. To recap, HB 3225 has passed the Texas House of Representatives, and it still waits a vote in the Senate before it gets signed into law. Previous bills that were as extreme that began in the Texas Senate have died on the House floor, so this passing the House first does not bode well for the safety of libraries in the state of Texas. And now to close out the podcast on more positive news. Colorado signs a law limiting school library book bans that goes into effect later this year. Senate Bill 25-63 requires school districts to create policies about the acquisition, retention, and display of library books and other materials by September. These policies will also govern book challenges and consider the process for removing them from any bookshelves in the state of Colorado. The two main points of this bill are, first, only parents of students within the school district will be allowed to challenge titles, and second, reviews of individual titles will be limited to once every 2 years. This means that pro-censorship groups will not be able to challenge titles themselves, and parents within the district will need to do so, and that if a title is challenged and is decided to keep on shelves, that title will not be up for removal again for 2 years after the decision. The bill was signed by Governor Jared Polis and will begin taking effect in September with the fall school year. Ahead of the signing, Lisa Cutter, a sponsor of the bill, said, quote, "Books are so important because names, experiences, identities, these things are being erased. To be able to experience how others are feeling, to learn empathy, to be able to see yourself in books. If there's no one else in your world like you, these things are so critical to developing an empathetic society." This will conclude an episode of the Book Faire podcast. We'll be closely following HB 3225 in Texas, but in the meantime, a thank you is needed for the state of Colorado for protecting the freedom to read. To find resources for stories reported in this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is always free. And as always, thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk at you next time.